Mayor, Chair Bloom.
Here. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No, there aren't, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Public comment. I've got two slips. Lazarus will be first, followed by Jane Brown.
It's going to be hard to find something that's not on this agenda. Well, good afternoon, Madam Mayor and ladies and gentlemen of the City Council. It's like, I just want to talk about, I was reading in, I think some people call it a newspaper, that the mayor dedicated a new car lot, rental car business. And so, I think, rental cars are going in the wrong direction. You might well start talking about putting more oil platforms off the coast. I don't think people are really getting the green idea. I mean, everywhere you go, there are SUVs. Man, how do people afford to put gas? What do they cost? About $90 to fill them things up? More. Yeah, it's incredible that people can even conceive, hanging on to these things. But then again, what do they do with them? I think maybe the city should start devising a plan. Yeah, what do we do with all these big cars? We just, tell people, well, you can leave that in your driveway, and we give them a special permit for it. I mean, obviously, they're not going to license it again. So, I don't know. I think something needs to be done about that. And something is happening. I mean, I've noticed the buses are getting more overcrowded. I ride the bus all the time, and we're going to need some more buses. So, because people are going to have to be getting out of their cars. That's going to be something that's going to happen right away. This isn't something that can, we can say, oh, well, we'll wait a couple years, and people are waiting at the bus stop, and the bus fills up, and they say, oh, well, these 10 people got to stay here. They're late for work or whatever. So, I mean, I think we really need to start heading in that direction. I don't think that rental car businesses are really something we should be looking at as any part of the solution. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Jane Brown will be the last public speaker.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm Jane Brown, a Public Affairs Manager with Southern California Edison, and I just wanted to take a minute because here we are experiencing the heat of the summer, and as many of you know, the state was afraid that we would not have as much electricity generation as we needed yesterday. So I want to just take a moment and remind everyone to conserve. The heat of the day generally happens in the afternoon, so that's one of the busiest times for energy demand, as well as when people get home from work, so typically between 5 and 8. So if you would please just wait to run your dishwashers, laundry, that sort of thing until after 8 p.m. If you would keep your thermostats at 78 degrees and use fans instead of air conditioners, block direct sunlight from overheating rooms, close doors and vents to unoccupied rooms. Also, if you have a business, also set your thermostat no lower than 78, and when possible, shift power-intensive work to early morning or evening hours. Also very important to turn off your computer, lights, photocopiers, and air conditioning when you leave the office for the day. If, as you know, several years ago we had rolling blackouts during the energy crisis, and although the state does not anticipate that that will happen this summer, it is a possibility if we have a very hot summer. And the way that customers can know where they are in that line is to go to our website at www.sce.com and go to the rotating outage section. In the top right-hand corner of your bill is your rotating outage number. You can take that number and look at the list that's online at Edison and see where you fall. If you're far down on the list, chances are you may never, ever have a rolling blackout, or it's years and years away. Or if your number has already been used once, it won't happen again. Fire and police are exempt, so if you live or have a business on the same circuit as a fire or police office, you will never experience a rolling blackout. And also, wanted to mention, since we're on this topic, about the Energy Efficiency Partnership, the Greater Santa Barbara Energy Efficiency Partnership. City of Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, Goleta, and the county and Edison have partnered together to do some really proactive stuff in making our area energy efficient. And so once again, Santa Barbara is playing a leadership role in the environment, which is wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for those reminders. Mr. Harton?
This is just under council member comments.
Okay, go ahead.
Are we to that session?
We just got there because of you.
Okay. Last night there was a really excellent meeting at the First Methodist Church. The interfaith clergy community of Santa Barbara had a meeting there. They had members from the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian community, all hoping for peace in the Middle East and asking people to not assign blame and to try to work together to come to some kind of a peaceful conclusion. I thought it was an excellent meeting. It was well attended. Last Thursday, the Community Environmental Council sponsored a seminar on peak oil, and it was extremely well attended, and it was a very alarming issue in that whatever expert you use, we're within 5 or 10 years of peak oil or maybe already past it, which means that we're on the downside of that curve, and that the other energy sources that we talked about, such as solar and wind and things, need to come into play pretty quickly, and we probably need to focus as much government attention as we can to that. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Falcone?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's good to be in some place where we actually are not suffering from the humidity today. It is very important what Ms. Brown just said. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate in absentia our colleague, Brian Barnwell, who was married on Saturday to the beautiful Camilla, and they are off on their honeymoon. So if anybody should wonder, they are enjoying life. Wednesday, the PARC, P-A-R-C board, which is an independent nonprofit board that deals with recreation throughout the South Coast, quite frankly, and even further. They reach up into the valley, had a very, very productive retreat on the future of the interface, particularly between the city and their nonprofit board, and how do we work in partnership, but in some instances, how do they help support recreation in the city in other instances. And so they will be giving us more details in their yearly report, which they bring, and we should hear that sometime in the not-too-distant future. Also, Edison-related story on Thursday. I was very proud to present a letter of recognition to Ernie Villegas, who was our district representative from Edison for many, many years, serving us incredibly well, the northern region. And so I was happy to present a letter of recognition from the city of Santa Barbara to Ernie, who is still the mayor of Fillmore, and I decided he's going to become one of the most dangerous animals on the planet, and that's a politician with way too much time on their hands, and every staff member in the audience knows exactly what I'm talking about. And today, I'd like to just mention that at Aldo's restaurant, if you go and you eat dinner tonight at Aldo's restaurant, 10% of their proceeds will be donated to the Legal Aid Foundation. So I believe the mayor and I will be having dinner there. I believe the mayor's going to make a little welcome or something. And have dinner. So everybody come have dinner and support the Legal Aid Foundation in the area, because they do tremendous work for those people who cannot access legal services. So thank you very much.
That's true. That was my first job after, well, waiting for bar results, but really, really a good group. Mr. Williams.
Well, a couple items, one of immense importance and one of, I think, interest. Yesterday was an integration meeting of COMB CCRB, and it finally became very obvious what was sort of the stumbling block issue, and it seems to be that ID number 1, which represents some areas north of the mountains in the San Ynez Valley and Solvang, want as part of any integration plan to have full voting rights, but reduce some. They feel like they're paying a little bit too much into things. And I wanted to maybe bring that to your attention so you could possibly give me some feedback as to how I can help represent the council in that regard. There's only probably about $5,000 at stake, though currently we get about 28% of the vote, meaning we get 2 votes out of 7, and we pay about 31% of the money. So if that formula changed and they get 14% of the vote and pay about 10% of the projects that affect them, then we would obviously pay a little bit more. Now, one school of thought is it's only $5,000, and one school of thought is, hey, wait a minute, what's the team spirit? So just wanted to put that in your ear so perhaps you could give me some feedback as to how to best represent the council and the city in that regard. The fun thing was I think this Community Environmental Council event that Councilmember Horton and I and Councilmember Falcone all attended. And Councilmember Schneider as well. Fortunately, she's next to me, so she can whisper in my ear that way. Most inspiring was a fellow by the name of Randy Udall, and any folk who have been following environmental politics for any length of time know that last name Udall, because the Udalls really were the heroes of open space protection in Colorado and Arizona, in particular. The other thing I did was follow up with bringing some of the participants and some audience members that had some solutions on the radio that following Saturday. And one system that I think that we should be considering and looking at is a wastewater treatment system that extracts the solids that can then be gasified into methane and as an energy source or to fuel natural gas vehicles, supposedly at better quality methane than we can get out of our gas company pipes. So that's an interesting idea. Don't know whether it will work yet, but I'll be pursuing that and providing information to the council.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schneider?
Thank you. A number of things. Last Wednesday is what I hope is the last council subcommittee on the advisory committee process, and except for probably some email exchanges with the committee members on looking at the council agenda report, I want to acknowledge Marcela Lopez and Brenda Alcazar and Cindy Rodriguez in the city clerk's office too, who've really helped us move this process along. We hope to have a presentation to the council in September prior to the fall recruitment. There's a couple of tweaks that we like to suggest to the council to move forward and on, and you'll be getting more information there. But one thing I don't know if you knew, because I didn't know until this meeting, we met last week with Nancy Rapp and other members of Parks and Rec about all the different advisory groups. This council appoints to 3 different community centers and the Creeks Advisory Committee. There's another 14 of them out there that the Parks and Rec Commission does the appointments, and we don't know who these people are necessarily. And what a great way to bring some of those advisory group people to other commissions perhaps in the future. And so how do we incorporate them into the recruitment process or acknowledge them for their good work? All those good things were brought up as part of last week. On behalf of the mayor, I got to, on Sunday, start off the poodle parade at the French Festival, and I was told my hair kind of looked like a poodle, so that was kind of Steve. Steve, who's the organizer, is quite entertaining. There were poodles from Woodland Hills, San Luis Obispo, Riverside, Santa Monica, and Santa Barbara in the local area, of course. But and there were hundreds of people waiting for the poodle parade. It was my first time there, but what a treat. So I was happy to do that on behalf of the mayor. Yesterday, the Leadership Council for the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness met. This week is the last full week of all the different subcommittees that's putting a draft plan together. There is a draft plan. It needs some tweaking. And then over the next course of the next couple of months, the Leadership Council will be able to hopefully adopt something and then bring it to the various elected bodies throughout the county about how to move forward in implementing. That's the big key. You can have all the plans you want, but then we need to implement the thing. So that's going to be the challenge there. Look forward to that also in the fall. Also this morning, as liaison to the MTD board meeting, just to let you know, the MTD board received a presentation from Rob Dayton this morning about the outer, uptown, whatever, State Street project, and how MTD should be a process and part of that input, because so much of it has to do with circulation and traffic and buses and, what should be the vision for that area. So they will be part of that, and they were very interested in hearing that process. And also just a little tidbit, July 4th, the MTD buses just before and just after the fireworks show down at the beach, there were more than 10,000 trips that day, just in that part of the day. So I thought that was pretty amazing. A lot less cars on the street for the fireworks. Finally, some sad news I want to share with the council and people listening is the passing of John Payne that occurred last Wednesday, July 12th. John, I personally knew him originally at Planned Parenthood. He was a board member there, but he's been active in so many parts of the community, the Rotary to La Casa de la Raza to Community Action Commission, Family Service Agency, the Community Housing Corporation, the Anti-Defamation League, Pueblo. He was a mental health social worker for the county for a number of years, and also an independent social worker afterwards, and really a great advocate for people who didn't have the voice to speak out or didn't feel like they had the access to do so, and he will be sorely missed. He died of a heart attack very unexpectedly last week, so I did want to acknowledge his passing here today.
Thank you. I think we'll adjourn the meeting later, not right now. See everybody get up and leave in his honor. Mr. House.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just up to second your sentiments there. As somebody who really was instrumental in helping to wake me up to a social conscience, that I just really appreciated that guy. Anyway, Fiesta has begun in this sense. I went to the pre-Fiesta tea over here at Casa de la Guerra this weekend.
I missed that.
Yeah, it was really something. It was the couple things to mention there. We now know who St. Barbara is. St. Barbara is Phoebe Mansour, who is just lovely and just going to be the best St. Barbara we've ever had. She's something else. And the senior spirit, Asia McLaughlin, the junior spirit, Olivia Villanovos, just danced their hearts out. And that junior spirit danced to a little thing called Mosquito of Love. And she just took our hearts, something else. So just want to say, just the spirit's out there, and Viva, and we're on the way, and a lot of fun coming up. Yesterday, I'd like to report that Ms. Schneider and Mr. Williams and I took a little walk around the east side with our friend Dave Fortson, and really got quite a good walking experience of our neighborhoods, and it was the right thing to do, and we need to do more of that, both on the west side and the east side, and I think we'll find more opportunities to do that. Just to kind of, we see our neighborhoods through the eyes of candidates going through door to door and handing out our little brochures and things. But after we're elected, we need to remember to do that once in a while too, and that was quite an experience. And I won't report more on it right now, but to say I'm renewed in my commitment, and I think we all are, to improving and supporting the people in our neighborhoods.
That's great.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Sure, Ms.
A
Falcone.
little follow-up on that. I would like to ask that group, on behalf of the rest of us, who many of us were also interested in doing that, to maybe write up a little memo of what you saw, what your observations were, what you found, because I know that I, who wanted to actually partake in that, would love to be able to know what your observations were on the ground. So I know it's a little bit of work, but it would be very meaningful.
Madam Mayor and Ms. Falcone,
House.
I did manage to take notes as we went along, and with that intention, and haven't yet circulated them, but I'd be very happy to do that. And
Great.
the others may want to chime in on that as well.
Okay, great. Okay, consent calendar. Oh, I got a little tiny report. I left last Wednesday and just got back late last night to Sister City celebration in Washington, D.C., and it was its 50th year. On September 11th, Can you believe it? Dwight Eisenhower in 1956 created People to People and Sister City. And it was a nice celebration in Washington. It was hot, and there were a lot of loving mosquitoes there, whatever that dance was. But anyway, Mr. Horton was honored, although he couldn't get there. And I was honored, and so were Mr. Gill and Marty Garcia, as well as Takako Wakita, who's very active. And it was just a nice, the most moving part was when the head of this, like the National League of Cities in Palestine, and the head of, like, the U.S. Conference of Mayors in Israel sat together on the stage and talked about what's going on in the Middle East right now. And the conclusion was that nations create conflict and start wars, but that cities are where the real work of the people are. So I kind of like that. And they would like the nations to stop warring so they can take care of their people. And I thought that's a good message. Okay, consent calendar. We have items 1 to 8.
I'd like to pull 4.
4, okay. Anybody else pull anything? Okay, go ahead and read what you need to, Brenda, and then we'll pull item 4.
Item number 3, adoption of ordinance for lease agreement with BDC Gateway. Recommendation that Council A adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving a 50-year ground lease dated August 17, 2006 between the City of Santa Barbara and BDC Gateway Associates, LLC, a California limited liability company, for construction and management of 160,000 square feet of commercial industrial space at 6100 Hollister Avenue at the Santa Barbara Airport. B, adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving a 50-year ground lease dated August 17, 2006 between the City of Santa Barbara and BDC Gateway Retail, LLC, a California limited liability company, for construction and management of 20,000 square feet of service retail space at 6100 Hollister Avenue at the Santa Barbara Airport. And C, adopt by reading of title only an ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Barbara approving a non-disturbance atonement and amendment agreement with Wells Fargo Bank Northwest National Association, a national banking association, the City of Santa Barbara, BDC Gateway Associated LLC, Citrix Systems Incorporated, a Delaware corporation, and VA Leasing BSC LLC, a Delaware limited liability company, effective upon recordation of the memorandum of lease and providing mortgagee protections to VA Leasing for the financing of the project improvements. And item number 4, contract for construction of the Mason Street pedestrian bridge at Sycamore Creek.
Okay, Mr. Williams, you had item 4.
I just wanted to have Mr. Kelly highlight the issue because as is often the perception is that outside the redevelopment agency zone that sometimes neighborhoods don't get as much attention with some of the capital needs that they have, and I just wanted to bring this to the public's attention because it's, I think, a victory in this regard and a real important project for the east side.
Okay, Mr. Kelly?
I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, Madam Mayor and council members and Councilmember Williams. Is that this is an item that came out of the relinquishment of Highway 144 some time ago, and it's been some time in the development to get it to this point. And what it is, instead of replacing the existing bridge at Sycamore Creek on Mason Street with a modern bridge, which would be a wider street and have significant impacts to the neighborhood, including significant disruption of the creek banks, et cetera, we opted to leave the existing bridge there, which has sufficient capacity for vehicles and also hydraulic capacity for flood capacity, and simply add a pedestrian bridge in coordination with or in contact with the neighborhood and contact with the school and our transportation planning department in order to accommodate the pedestrians in the neighborhood. And it's been some time in the works, but we're quite happy to move forward with it to wrap this project up.
Okay. Okay, any
I didn't want
questions?
to vote on it separately, but just wanted to put it out there
That was
so
good.
the community to see.
Sure, that was good. Mr. Horton and Mr. House?
And I'll move the consent calendar.
Okay. Okay, is there a
Second.
Okay, Mr. Horton.
Just I wanted to comment before, we move on, and that's that same project. I want to be sure I understand, that is on Mason Street.
Correct.
Close to, let's see, above the school, the Franklin School, and the children are using that to go in both directions to school, if I understand it. There's a Cleveland School above as well. Okay, well, I just want to thank you very much.
Yeah. Maybe we can come to a ribbon cutting or something. It's always fun. Or at least drive us by there, or we'll walk over there, right, Mr. House?
I was going to say during public comment, but I held my tongue, Madam Mayor, that when you did the ribbon cutting for the Enterprise, at least you walked.
We walked over there. You helped me. You walked with me. We did walk over there. And if people don't want to own cars, they're going to have to rent one once in a while. Oh, well, anyway. Here. There we go. So we have a motion and a second on the consent calendar. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Vermant. And Chief Prince, too, is back there. Okay, item 9, please.
Item number 9, required findings for the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation and Ensemble Theater Grant. Recommendation that the agency board adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the redevelopment agency of the city of Santa Barbara approving and adopting the findings required by Health and Safety Code Section 33445 for funding of a joint capital project between the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation and the Ensemble Theater located immediately outside the redevelopment project area.
Okay. Mr. Bossy, are you it, or Mr. Gustafson?
Mr. Bossy will give this
Oh,
presentation.
there you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Bossy.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and agency board members. My name is Brian Bossy, and I'm with the Redevelopment Agency. On June 20th of this year, the agency board approved the fiscal year 2007 Redevelopment Agency budget. And included in that approval was the authorization to execute grant agreements with a number of with all of our grantees. Additionally, as part of that approval, staff was asked to return at a later date to adopt specific findings for the approval of $1.5 million in agency grant funds for the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation and the Ensemble Theater's joint project on the campus of El Presidio State Historic Park. El Presidio State Historic Park's campus is located predominantly within the Redevelopment Agency's project area. However, the Alacama Theater and the Old City College site, which are the focus of the improvements to be made with these grant funds, are located on a portion of El Presidio State Historic Park that are immediately outside of our project area. California Community Redevelopment Law does allow, with the consent of the legislative body, the funding of projects on property that is publicly owned, even if that property is outside of the project area, if certain findings can be made, and that's why we're here today. The redevelopment of the Alacama Theater and the Old City College site meet all the required findings in the law because the proposed improvements are a benefit to the Central City redevelopment project area. There are no other reasonable means of financing the improvements available to the trust. The improvements will eliminate blighting conditions inside the project area by drawing additional activity in and around the site. And an increase in activity improves the vitality of the project area, which leads to additional public and private improvements, and therefore forestalls blight-inducing conditions and blight as it exists today. In November of 2002, the agency board made similar findings to fund the Trust restoration of the Resource Center, which is located on the same site as the Alacama Theater and Old City College site. So in summary, we're recommending that you adopt the resolution making the findings required by California Community Redevelopment Law. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. I should also note that Mr. Jerry Jackman is in the audience to answer any questions you may have of the trust.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions, comments? Mr. Horton? Mr. Trustman?
Well, I think it's a really good project and great for the community. I'm wondering if Dr. Jackman could tell us about joint use, or whether the community might be able to participate in any of the facilities, or how does he envision this thing might look 5 or 10 years from now in terms of community usage.
Dr. Jackman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilmember Horton. members of council. We right now have drafted a lease with the Ensemble Theater for the next 10 years, and we haven't signed it yet, not because we don't intend to, but the trust has to work out its own agreement with state parks, and they're sending that down to us, and we need to have that in place before we start leasing out the properties in the state park. But in this lease arrangement, the trust will have a shared use of the facility without interfering with the plays that will be taking place there. And we just sat down and we talked about how we can plan this together. And the reason we want to do that is because we have many, many events that take place in the Presidio Chapel that would be more appropriate in an auditorium like that. And when we make these improvements to the ensemble, or to the Alacama Theater, there'll be some sound equipment and so forth, and projection systems and so forth put in, and then we'll be able to do some of these lectures over there. I want to make it clear that we're not interfering with any of the programs that will be going on, put on by the Ensemble Theater. That's just one area. Another thing that we're doing is we're relocating buildings. One that's on Santa Barbara Street that will be moved over onto the site that will then allow us to build another section of the Presidio, but it will also allow us to move our offices from the park site over to the Ensemble, or to the Alacama property. We're calling that project Plaza de Alacama because we're going to be removing cars, putting satellite parking lots in, and creating a really wonderful downtown area where people will be able to come. And for anybody nervous about Playa Azul, that will definitely be there in the future. So I could go on this, but that's just a few examples of what we'll be doing there. Thank you.
Sounds really great. Ms. Falcone?
Thank you, Dr. Jackman. I was wondering if you could, during our discussion with the allocations of RDA money this time, there was a discussion about the length of time of the lease that you were entering into the Ensemble Theater. I was wondering if a time has been determined, because I know that was so concerned with some of us.
Right. Right. Well, we had told them we will do a 10-year lease with them, and that 10-year lease will not start until it's signed. So that's the first step. We are actually requesting state parks to give us the trust a 20-year agreement. And if we can get that 20-year agreement for the trust, then we may be able to extend the lease for Ensemble up to a longer period of time. Yeah, because normally our agreements have been 10 years. Since I've been at the trust, we're in our third 10-year agreement. That's how long I've been at the trust. I may call on you if it doesn't happen.
The stability of the ensemble and the amount of money that we're putting into the renovation of the building is, I know, on my mind, and I don't think anyone else.
Right.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
One more question for Mr. Gustafson and Mr. Lawson, and that has to do with, just refresh my fuzzy memory on the gave money to these two efforts, both the trust and the ensemble. Could you? Oh, hello. Well, that was all off. That was all off. So it's a secret conversation that I had with Dr. Jackman. You have to read my lips. Would you refresh my memory as to, we made some mention of some money that was earmarked specifically for the building as opposed to some of these other, could you just refresh my memory on the breakout of that? Because I just clearly don't remember.
Sure, Madam Chair, Member Falcone, I can do that. The original joint request from the ensemble and from the trust was for $2 million to do all the things that Dr. Jackman just described. The ultimate decision was to provide them with a $1.5 million grant, $1 million of which would be for the renovation of the Ensemble Theater building itself, and the additional $500 would go for all of the other associated improvements to the plaza that Jerry's talking about.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I just really needed to get that clear back in my head. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. House?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Do we have speakers?
We have none?
Then, if I may, I'd like to make a motion that
perfect.
that we adopt the resolution along with the findings for Health and Safety Code section.
Second.
Okay. Is there any more discussion at all? Okay, all
I
those-
do want to say thank you for those reassurances.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it, because I think people could have a concern about the theater and the restaurant and like that. But thank you very much for this.
Plaza is very dear to our hearts.
Yes, it is.
Our stomachs, too.
And our stomachs.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. That's a good project. Item number 10, please.
Item number 10, grant for rehabilitation of Victoria Hotel.
Thanks. Okay, Mr. Gustafson.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board. People's Self-Help Housing has requested, and we are recommending a rehab grant of $95,000 for the Victoria Hotel. That's the hotel at 22 East Victoria Street. The grant would come from the Redevelopment Agency Affordable Housing Set Aside, and it would include the following work: electrical upgrades for $33,000, plumbing and drainage for about $22,000, security improvements for $25,000, sidewalk repairs in the front of the building for $6,000, and then a construction contingency amount. A little bit about the Victoria Hotel. It was a 28-unit residency hotel conversion that provides truly last resort housing for very low-income folks in our community, and quite a number of those folks would otherwise be homeless if it weren't for the Victoria Hotel. A number of those residents work downtown, and very few of them have cars. The hotel was acquired by People's Self-Help Housing in 1999 with our strong encouragement and with our funding combined with our other funding sources. And that was at the point at which the hotel was in escrow with another buyer to become a boutique tourist hotel. We felt it was important to preserve this last resort housing that we still had. The hotel received $1.42 million from us in Community Development Block Grant and Home Funds, and that was for the acquisition and rehabilitation. And then the Housing Authority issued tax-exempt bonds to make the whole deal work. But there weren't enough funds at that time to go around to get all of the preferred work done. There were some systems that kind of had to be lived with in their existing condition at that time. We think now is a time to go back and fix those other systems. The grant's an attempt to finish the job and make sure the hotel's of the quality that's consistent with all of our other affordable housing projects in the city. And after this grant, just to let you know what we're doing in terms of the fiscal year 2007 housing budget, we'll have approximately $1.5 million left in the RDA housing set aside at your discretion to appropriate to projects as they come along. We still have approximately $2 million in the housing contingency fund that you set aside when you reworked the capital budget back in January of 2005. We still have probably $300,000 left in the opportunity acquisition fund after having spent just recently the $2 million on helping the Housing Authority acquire the Hagen Printing Building. So that's the fiscal picture. Strongly recommend this grant. I think it'll really improve the Victoria Hotel, and I must say in their behalf that they've been stalwart in dealing with the impacts of the construction of the garage and the theater, and Jeanette Duncan, the executive director, is here and has been very patient and very understanding, and I don't know whether Jeanette has anything to say to you, but that concludes my comments.
Well, she put in a speaker's slip.
Good.
And we know which side she's on. So come on up, Jeanette Duncan.
I appreciate this, and I have to say on behalf of the residents, you know, it's been 3 years really of disruption between the parking garage and now the Granada Theater, and Dave probably knows that part of the funds will be used for some better security system because we had a lot of vandalism. One Vietnam vet had 3 different bicycles stolen. He would, you know, have one stolen, we'd get it replaced, another one. And so we need security cameras back there, and we need to beef up the security access to the basement because unfortunately we found out that there are little 4-legged creatures that lived at the bottom of the Granada Theater probably for a century that discovered that we had doors they could get in and went down in the basement and are kind of proliferating and got into some of the walls, and so now we've had to have exterminators there. So we need these doors. But yeah, it was pretty interesting that I guess in the bottom of the theater they had boiler rooms and all kinds of things down there, and these critters had probably been there a century almost, you know, living down below. So we don't really need them at the Victoria Hotel. So this is going to help us clear them out, hopefully, and then upgrade some of the electrical wiring because, as you know, that's a hotel built in 1926. And so we did as much as we could, but we need to really make it a better place and beef up the security.
Boy, if they could talk, I bet they could tell us about some wonderful plays and
I know.
performances.
I mean, it was
Isn't that fun?
amazing. And we had no idea they even have these in downtown Santa Barbara because they're big. Big.
Big? We're like
Big guys.
Okay.
Not little mice, big guys.
It's a little
Okay.
Phantom of the Theater,
Right, right.
New York-sized.
Right, and we-
Living on
first-
popcorn.
First, we couldn't believe it, and then someone saw one run across State Street where the sandwich shop was.
Oh, my
And,
gosh.
So, you know, the
Yeah, we can't stop there. Thank you.
We're losing revenue by the word.
We're all out of here. No,
So
I
anyway,
understand.
I mean, this could
Yeah.
end up being a play of some kind itself.
Yeah.
As to what, you know, but the people at the hotel will greatly appreciate
Well, there's a
this.
big health issue with it, too.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of funny, but it is a health risk, so thank you. Thank you, Jeanette, for your work. I can't believe it's been 7 years. Then what an amazing thing. We have some questions or comments. Mr. Horton?
Question. Dave, in looking at the budget here, it seemed to me that that's a lot of work for not very much money. And
Yeah.
having recently done some remodeling work at home, I was astounded she could get that much done. And I was wondering, do you have any estimates on this work, or is it just sort of a guess?
Mr. Gustafson?
Yes, Madam Chair, Mr. Horton, we have looked at the numbers that have been estimated by the hotel, and when we get a good number, we like not to question it. It is the maximum amount we're going to grant, and they're very industrious and resourceful, and a lot of the work they have a strong staff to do on their own, so we think they can achieve these numbers.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Mr. Williams?
I just wanted to report, because I've been over to the hotel recently, that it's looking a lot better. It still could use the work, and I think that they're efficiently using that. Really, the people that are there are really people that are going to succeed.
Yeah.
You know,
They're good people. That's right.
you can tell these are folks that have had hard times, but they are going to succeed. So I just wanted to give you that report.
Okay. Mr. House, go ahead.
I'll be the motion guy today, and I'm happy to, because this is the bookend. You know, we've got the other project coming on the other side, and for this to be picked up like this and improved, it's just right, just really good. So thank you, Ms. Duncan, for your work. I move the staff report to support this grant.
Okay. There's a motion, a second. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Ms. Duncan. Appreciate you coming. Okay, item 11.
Item number 11, pedestrian master plan approval. Recommendation that council adopt by reading of title only a resolution of the council of the city of Santa Barbara adopting the 2006 pedestrian master plan.
Okay. Mr. Nisich?
Yes.
We have all the usual suspects
Are we on?
except for two.
Let's just not tell them they're not here. Oh, there's a letter, that's right. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Nisich.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is Tony Nisich. I'm the city's Public Works Director. And this item before you is the adoption of the city's pedestrian master plan. And it's, how are we doing? As they're working on the technical difficulties, this is a very complex and a document that's been worked on for many years. If the council has seen the document, it's quite large, and my goodness, what all this time. Okay.
We're calling
We're calling.
the AV folks.
We'll continue as we're working on this. There's been some discussion about what the document is and what it will use for, and I wanted to perhaps frame that before we get into a more detailed presentation, which may be even different than we talked about, but I'm sure we'll get through it. I want to say this plan is really designed to take the pedestrian system to the next level. It's to develop a comprehensive pedestrian system that enhances and increases the city's walkability to the extent that all people will feel safe walking, to increase connections to destinations throughout the city, to enhance the Paseo network, to increase the number of children who walk and bike to school. The objective of this plan really is to address the remaining obstacles to increased walking, such as deficient facilities, concerns about safety, attractiveness and appeal, and lack of connectivity. The pedestrian master plan, as guided by the goals and policies of the circulation element of the general plan, sets forth specific obtainable strategies that result in tangible improvements over the next 30 years. The goals, policies, and strategies are principles that will guide the development and implementation of this pedestrian plan for years to come. The goals and policies guide the way the public improvements are made, where resources are allocated, how programs are operated, how department priorities are determined, and how private development is designed. This plan lays out a vision of how to continue and expand programs and improvements to increase walking for the years to come. So that's kind of a short synopsis of what we think this plan is all about, and hopefully we're ready now, one way or the other.
Or not.
Rob Dayton, we'll do it one way or the other. Rob Dayton will give the presentation, and our supervisor transportation planner and Brownie Allen, our transportation manager, is here to answer any questions. So with
Okay,
that,
Mr. Dayton.
We'll begin.
Madam Mayor and council members, it's kind of an exciting day for us, for sure. Anytime we're introducing another implementation of the circulation element of the general plan, and that's exactly what is Mr. Nisich was talking about, is an implementation of that circulation element, further refining the details of how we're going to implement that plan. The circulation element states that the vision statement is that Santa Barbara should be a city in which alternative modes of transportation and mobility are so available and so attractive that the automobile is a choice and not a necessity. And we've been really riding on that vision and building on each component. You know that we have a bicycle master plan already. And so when we look at pedestrians, we look to Chapter 5 of the circulation element. What is that goal? It is to increase walking in our city. And these right here outline the 8 policies under the circulation element to create an integrated pedestrian system, to link pedestrians with other modes of travel. A PASEO plan is called for to revise and enhance our standards for pedestrian improvements, create a pedestrian-friendly environment, safer street crossings, amend the zoning ordinance to be to encourage pedestrian usage, and also encourage the community to be involved in the benefits of walking and promoting those benefits. So with that, we present to you the pedestrian master plan, which will do a number of things. It gives us a blueprint for a pedestrian network. It creates design standards where they did not exist, and it gives us a safe routes to school component and program officially, establishes a PASEO plan. It does promote walking. It creates an institutional foundation. Well, what's that? That sounds a little bureaucratic, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about what that is. Increase grant funding opportunities. With this plan, we would expect to have a lot more funding resources available to us because we're much more positioned to get those. So with that, I'm going to give you an outline of the plan. In developing the plan, we're really focused on the first 4 chapters, and that is to figure out what the history. The city was created before the automobile was invented, so walking has always been extremely important to our city. We looked at what the pedestrian system is today, and then we had public meetings which are described in Chapter 3 to really give us a firm grasp, and then using the circulation element to develop our goals, policies, and strategies, which are Chapter 4. And then those goals, policies, and strategies are translated in the next 6 chapters, Chapters 5 through 10. And Chapters 5 through 10, each one of these chapters is a goal of the pedestrian master plan, so read it that way. That is to improve the pedestrian system, establish and enhance safe routes to school, protect, expand the PASEO system, establish pedestrian design guidelines, encourage people to walk, and again, this institutional foundation we're going to create, and I promise I'll explain what that means. So, improve the pedestrian system. We took the best things we already have. We already have a sidewalk info program that is now in a policy. It's been very successful at incrementally putting sidewalks that are missing on our city streets. It prioritizes capital project lists, so between corridors and intersections, lots of detail work for operations staff to go ahead and do immediately, really easy stuff to the more complicated stuff of taking an entire corridor and what would you do on that street corridor to make it a more pedestrian enhanced place. Highway 101 crossings. We have a barrier in town, and that's Highway 101. It's a barrier for pedestrians. So how could we make it better for pedestrians to cross that barrier? We have policy now that shows us. urban trails policy. There are plenty of open spaces within the city of Santa Barbara, and those city spaces within the urban core have opportunities for travel, not just for recreation, but to get from point A to point B. Transit connections. How can we position our pedestrian infrastructure to be directly related to transit? You know, it's interesting that regardless of what mode of travel you're using, you're always going to end up a pedestrian. And so we really need to have our infrastructure integrated with all modes. Accessibility policy. We need to make sure that our infrastructure is accessible for all people, and now we have a policy to do that. Chapter 6, Goal 2, establish enhanced safe routes to school. This chapter now describes the city's role in SR2S, and it has routes and school maps in the document which show every school and what is the best way to get to that school from where you live. It has 3 concept plans, 3 pilot schools. This one is an example of the Cleveland school plan, the pilot schools that show exactly what we could do to make it better for kids going to those schools to get there. And we would expect other schools would come forward to go through this pilot process with us, defining improvements along the way. It outlines school programs that can be implemented, we can participate in, and other agency or interest groups like COAST can do to encourage kids to walk to school. And then lastly, and probably the greatest amount of opportunity for funding will reside within this program, the Safe Routes to School program. So it positions us uniquely for that. Goal 3 is the Paseo plan. And it outlines the Paseo network and the downtown system. It's kind of a feather in Santa Barbara's cap, unique to us. And it has policies on how we protect and preserve and enhance those. And then also management and maintenance strategies. It's pretty complicated. There's different ownerships involved. It outlines the various ownerships and how we can strategically manage and maintenance through those different ownerships. It has an expansion policy. One of the things that's interesting that came up in the public process is Paseos are great downtown, but what about the rest of the city? And so we've kind of opened it up. The Paseo plan is not limited to downtown. In fact, the plan suggests that there's other areas, specifically Outer State Street, where we should be looking for new Paseos. And then it has priority locations for new Paseos. And then lastly, a menu of ways to establish Paseos. Pretty challenging feat, and we haven't had a new one in quite some time. So goal 4, establish pedestrian design guidelines. This is a very unique chapter in that it has principles of pedestrian design, outlines exactly what they would be for a designer who's about to design in the public right-of-way. And then it creates the specific standards that engineers and architects can understand and relate to. Here's how you do exactly what the principles say. And then accessibility solutions. If you're in a situation where you can't design an infrastructure specific to someone who needs accessibility, here's some solutions where you could make the design better. And then it has a toolbox for street crossings. You know, over the times, we had many discussions of different street crossings and how to do that, and there are many unique solutions, and now we have a toolbox that we can readily access to give us the best design for the best location. Construction zone standards. Construction happens. What do we do with the pedestrians in the meantime, and how do they continue to walk by construction zones? We have standards. Transit stops. What are the standards for those transit stops? How should they look? How should they integrate with the infrastructure? Goal 5, which is Chapter 9, is encouraging people to walk. You know, it's really interesting how the health community has really gotten around transportation and how do we get people to walk so that they could be more healthy. This chapter gives us many ideas on how to do that. Pedestrian awareness and education. How not just so that motorists are aware of pedestrians, but how would they culturally change the way they look at pedestrians? We believe when you see a pedestrian in your motorist, you should see one less car on the road. You should see someone to be respected for not driving and allowing you to drive, that sort of perspective. Strategies for increasing motorist awareness and the connection between walking and physical health that I mentioned. And then finally, enforcement. Not just enforcing pedestrian laws, but You've heard of the, I guess, for lack of a better term, the pedestrian sting operation, where we actually have a plainclothes police officer crossing the street and then motorists getting cited for not yielding. And then finally, this bureaucratic institutional foundation that supports the pedestrian. What is that? Well, it's okay to have a document, and many cities will have a planning document, but if it's on the shelf and it's not incorporated in, and become an institutional foundation, it just won't happen. It doesn't translate. So what this chapter is about is translating everything we've talked about in the rest of the document to our city culture. How does it integrate? And the way it does that is it gets folded into the land development process. This perhaps is the greatest asset we have, is people develop what is the right way, what are the opportunities that we don't want to miss to make sure that the pedestrian system is implemented and constructed in the right way. Proposed zoning ordinance changes. In the appendix, there's a complete zoning ordinance draft of new language and changes that we would bring forward in part or in whole in the future of how we could make sure that these improvements get implemented. Capital Improvement Program policy sets us up for when we do a CIP, here's the list, here's the priority. It gives us a good way of fitting them into the CIP readily. And then a funding strategy. And I think that this is one of the major reasons, as we said, as to why we'd have a pedestrian master plan, is that we want to get and capture and have more funding available to us so that we can leverage the little money we have on infrastructure to the greatest extent possible. Who will use the plan? Well, of course, you will. Boards and commissions, applicants, teachers, staff, administrators. One of the things that's really unique about this plan is it's really a 4-in-1. You've got the pedestrian master plan, which will be the entire document, but then you've got 3 separate documents that come out that are also separately bounded. Like the Safe Routes to School chapter is separate, can be separately bound and will be printed that way so we can give it directly to teachers and parents and administrators, because that's just what they need. And then the pedestrian design guide, we can give that to engineers and architects because that's what they need. And then lastly, the Paseo plan, something that will probably be reside with the Historic Landmarks Commission and the Planning Commission, something that they can have as readily access to. So the usability is high. And then in terms of how we'll use it, we've mentioned some of these, but to reiterate, in the capital improvement program, to have a better design for improvements, to maximize grant opportunities, the land development process, certainly to promote walking and make schools more walk-bike accessible. How did we get here? Well, it's been a long process. The Alta Planning and Design was the consultant. They believe that this is the best document in the United States. Of course, we're going to agree. The public meetings and surveys that we've had over 4 public meetings. We had an extensive survey, great response that created the foundation for the goals and the policies. And then the technical advisory committee from many departments. This was a staff advisory committee from many departments and divisions who worked hard to make sure that the plan fit with all the various city culture that we have. And then the Transportation Circulation Committee and Planning Commission reviewed the document as well. We had over 11 public meetings that included the TCC, the PC, and the Historic Landmarks Commission, the Architectural Board of Review. And then finally, the document is also exempt, has a notice of exemption under CEQA, and has undergone environmental review by the Community Development Department and specifically environmental analysts. So that's the end of my presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, we have a letter here from Santa Barbara Safe Streets, and I don't see Michael Self here, but she writes that she opposes the plan because no environmental review has been done, and that it wasn't noticed and didn't include all citizens, et cetera, et cetera. Public input was limited, et cetera. If she were here, we could talk to her about it, but without her being here, I just want to say, and you just pointed out that you did environmental review on it. Not every environmental review ends up with a full-blown EIR, but that the environmental analyst has to look at it to decide what level, and so that was done in of all the public meetings, and this is one too. So I think I mean, that's how I would answer her charges. Keith Kaufman Gray is here. He's the chair of the Transportation Circulation Committee, and I'm glad you're here. It's always hard to get here during the day for
Got my day
working
off today.
folks. But thanks, you took the day off. There you go.
Hi,
Hi,
I'm
Keith.
Keith Kaufman Gray. I'm chair of the Transportation Circulation Committee. And I just got to say, it's been a long process to get here today, and I'm very happy to see it getting to this point. The TCC voted unanimously to approve the pedestrian master plan that's before you today. And the city's Transportation Circulation Committee was formed in 1999. Its purpose is to advise City Council and the Planning Commission on transportation issues, including the circulation element to the city general plan and various dealings with alternative transportation strategies. This pedestrian master plan expands on Goal 5 of the circulation element to, quote, increase walking and other paths of travel. The City of Santa Barbara has a balanced approach to its transportation needs throughout its circulation element. This pedestrian master plan will help the TCC and its purpose to advise you, the City Council, and the Planning Commission on transportation issues. And I just hope you'll approve it today, because it will really help our work to have this document to use for reference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schneider?
Thank you. We have no more speakers? Or
No more speakers.
Off we go.
Mhm.
This is quite an incredible document, actually, and I think we sort of got a preview at our joint meeting with the school board about the Safe Routes to School segment of that joint meeting, and I think that's an incredible part. That partnership there is going to be really important, and I do want to make a few specific comments on here. One, the maps in the document I think are incredible. You can actually look at the pathways. How do you get from point A to point B, and look to see what kind of improvements we could look forward to seeing in the future. To me, one of the biggest pieces is the curb cuts, and I know if Mr. Barnwell was here, he would probably echo that statement. And to see it's the map next to page 100 of just mapping out where are the missing ramps throughout the city. And I hope as we move forward looking at this, obviously if there's projects coming forward to incorporate those changes as we go, but in terms of prioritization to look at really heavily pedestrian-used areas. For example, Councilmember House mentioned earlier our walk around the east side, and that's a huge, pedestrian-dependent neighborhood, and so many curbs don't have any curb cuts, and it's not, and it, of course, it's for people who use wheelchairs, but I'm thinking of people with strollers and shopping, not shopping carts per se, but to use any kind of grocery carts or whatever, to help them, anything with wheels, and that's going to be a big piece. So I hope in terms of prioritization, we look at places like the east side and the west side, and also look at ways to get from point A to point B, and you don't have to cross 3 streets to cross the street if you needed to use a ramp. I sometimes see that where, because maybe projects happened on 3 corners, if you wanted to get across one corner, you have to go around in a circle or something, so to fill in those gaps. Certainly the intersection at St. Andrews and Carrillo, I saw that was high up on the priority list to create that, make it a more safe crossing, and such a highly used intersection on a variety of levels and heavily populated. One question dealing with the pedestrian signals and I think that this was in the long-term goal of some areas having timed, you go to other cities and very heavily used intersections to have the countdown of when the lights will turn red. And I know we don't have those here now, but it looks like those are part of the long-term solution, which is great. And I think, because I know when I go to a city, the first thing I want to do when I travel, I want to walk around. I want to see what is this town like, or what's the city like. And you don't get the same feel from a car. You get it from walking, whether it's the downtown core or other neighborhoods, and certainly busy sections. Those, I think those kind of intersections are very helpful and will be helpful for our residents and visitors alike. I don't know if there's anything in here about, there's some cities that have where all the cars stop and pedestrians can go every which way. They can go diagonally across the street, and to me, State and Cabrillo Boulevard seems like that would be, what is that? Scatter? What's the term? Is that the term?
It's called a scramble phase.
Scrambled eggs, scrambled walking. Okay, so, and I didn't see that in here. I don't know if that's something we want to look at, but that place in particular where so many people are walking in that intersection and waiting for a long time for cars to get by, if there was a place where the pedestrians can do any which way they like for a few minutes, that would be, or a minute or two. So to me, I mean, this is step one, right? What's the saying? Is it Confucius that the journey of 1,000 miles starts by taking the first step? I paraphrase or demolish that, but this is the first step here, and I appreciate the tremendous amount of work here and look forward to as we move things forward. So thank you very much.
We're smiling because the scramble corner at that particular place right in front of Stearns Wharf has been talked about before in the past, and it's so logical that it seems like it would work, but we've had various analyses of it, and I don't know. And let's keep it on the table. But the other thing that surprised me, the only thing that surprised me actually in the pedestrian master plan, they have a great document. But I saw a roundabout at State and Cabrillo, which I don't think of roundabouts and pedestrians very easily. So if you could just tell me how that one came about. And I love roundabouts. I saw them going in Washington all over the place. There were a couple more that I hadn't seen before. So I like roundabouts because I think they do move the traffic along, and they're pretty safe, but I don't think of them in connection with the pedestrian master plan. So, Mr. Dayton.
Madam Mayor, our consultant believed that would be the best balance between pedestrians and cars. One of the issues with the scramble phase or, anything, well, backing up, level service C during the week because there's no pedestrians there, same amount of cars almost, but pedestrians in the mix, now we've got a level service F condition. So balancing the demand for both of those is kind of a tricky thing. They thought the roundabout would be best. And that's just a conceptual, possibility for that corridor, and it has the roundabout on there. When we get to discussing the corridor and what's the best, in fact, we've already done that quite a bit with the redevelopment agency. That's what we get into the conversation and the meat of the specific issue. That's where we kind of make the decision and have public involvement on the decision to do whatever we do.
Okay, so it's not a done deal,
That's
which
right.
like people like to say when they find things in the plan. But kudos to you for this plan. I think it's wonderful. I enjoyed reading it. Well, let's go down the line here. Mr. House, and then we'll come back. Mr. House?
My apologies to those who had their mics ready to go before me.
Well, everybody does.
That's okay.
That's what the problem. Go ahead.
Before I make big, other comments, I'll just say thank you very much. I mean, it's just phenomenal work effort to everybody who's been involved in our staff and TCC. Thank you very much, and to all the others in the community that participated. This is just phenomenal. I mean, a good follow-through from the circulation element, and it was what we intended when we drafted it, that we would go ahead and enrich the different chapters as we could as time went on. First to just the little nitpicky kind of things, and then to the concluding kind of remarks. I think you meant something different than what's on this one of these charts here. It has a little thing that says road dies from 4 to 2. Did you ever see that little typo that's in here? It's supposed to be road diet. But I just want you to know that's in that Cabrillo Boulevard Harbor area thing, and it's one of those things that looks so beautiful it could live there forever, and nobody might notice it except for me. But now, it's in one of the little boxes that points onto West Cabrillo Boulevard. Small thing to change.
We do read these things.
Road. You got it? Okay. And I think it was the road diet concept. There was some of the small things. The street furniture has always been an issue. Street furniture not meaning nice seats on the street, but the utility cabinets and things like that. And there's a section in here that gets all the way down like into the urban design guideline kind of conversation. I very much appreciate that and want to call it out as an example of how this document is tying in with our other policy and guideline type documents. Some of the specificity, I think the diagrams are showing where these things should go, and people have made great mistakes in the past in our city, and this is a chance to catch those in advance and improve them. There's on page 243, I want to take really strong issue with the language that's there about modern roundabouts. And there are 4 paragraphs there that seem to I've done an awful lot of research on roundabouts, and this is contrary to all the evidence that I've encountered. It expresses people's fears and concerns. I mean, this is on page 243, and it's a description of modern roundabouts. I didn't catch this literally until today. I saw, oh, good, they cover roundabouts, and I just went on by. And I read it, and I caught it. I left a message for you, Mr. Dayton. The issues, of course, with people who are visually impaired and such, those are things we're working out globally, and they're coming up with solutions and things. I do understand that. But the other comments that are in here don't speak to the 70, 80%, 90% reduction in injuries for pedestrians at roundabouts. The shorter distances they have to cross. This even indicates that there may be more. The increase that we've seen here in pedestrian use, where we've introduced a roundabout at Milpa Street, doubling the use by pedestrians. I mean, there's these 4 paragraphs, or at least 3 of them, seem to go the wrong direction. My request of you, because I believe we're going to pass this today, is that staff takes another look at that little section and gets it right, or does another review of that. And then I had, I think, one more little thing here. Oh, it's very small. It goes back to page 256. And one of the things that we're pointing to here is our bus stops, and we're using the bus shelter and the little picture that you have there. I just want to commend to your attention the one that's at Carpinteria and Milpa Street, and that's the one that we worked very hard with MTD. It went through ABR review. It's gone through an awful lot of review, and it will be, as I understand it, and you may check with MTD to be sure, a prototype for the rest of their system. And perhaps, and maybe not, but perhaps an image like that would be more appropriate there in your future editions. Those are my nitpicky things. The most important thing I want to say is how valuable this will be. The samples that are in here, and I think the public should recognize this, you have lots of examples in here. By our passing this today, and perhaps maybe I should just check in on this, it's my understanding that our adopting this doesn't mean that we're going to do each literal example that's in here, or on the other side that our workload is limited to those things. Would you speak to that a little bit, Mr. Dayton, please?
Yeah, Mr. Dayton.
That's right, Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, that's exactly true. The things that you should be paying the most attention is the policy language that, and I think we included a summary attached to your council report of all the policies. The goals and the policies are kind of the firm ground that the council is adopting. The strategies are more of a flexible explanation of how that policy can be implemented. Most of the details in terms of, like we mentioned, the corridor plans and other explanations of designs and as examples are very flexible. And then the only caveat to that is Chapter 8, which is the design guidelines, the pedestrian design guide, and that is meant to be more firm ground as well in terms of detail.
Well, thanks for that. In the very back, there was some recommendations, and it's recommended revisions to municipal code language. Would you tell us how you intend that to be used by the council and by our boards in the future?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, what we would propose to do as a part of our work program and fitting it with P3 and budgetary workload assignments is we would come back to the TCC, starting with the TCC and working with them on the specific ordinance changes. This is the draft ordinance changes is just that example, a draft of how we would go about implementing what's in the plan by ordinance. We would go work with TCC and then other appropriate boards and commissions, and then come to council, the ordinance committee, with those proposed changes.
Great. So that's a starting point for that conversation.
That's right.
Again, I say that again for people who see this or are concerned about. Those are suggestions that gets us into that conversation, and then we go through our process of adopting those resolutions, ordinances.
That's correct.
Okay. Then the very last thing that I'd like to say on this is that the pedestrian master plan that I read here is in the Santa Barbara tradition of people-oriented planning and design, and it is good.
Thank you, Ms. Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Kudos, 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 all around. This is a volume of work that is really going to be very useful to everybody, but I just kind of want to, the roundabout issue, which those of us who are familiar with East Coast or Europe are sort of more familiar with than maybe out on this edge of the continent, but it's all about education. How do you enter? How do you exit? Who has the right-of-way? Some places the person on the right has the right-of-way. Sometimes it's just the person entering has to yield. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different rules, and maybe what we need to do, since we seem to be enamored with how this traffic device actually helps in a lot of instances. Some places it may not work, and we're doing that work at this moment to see what is viable and what's not. But I think that we need to come up with a standard practice of how we expect people to behave here in this general area when it comes to roundabouts, and then integrate how does it actually work with pedestrians, because quite frankly, I don't see it. It's hard for me to envision being a pedestrian and actually not having to run across most large roundabouts. So I think if we standardize how people proceed, either with cars, on bikes, or on foot, in these devices, then educate folks. We'll be ahead of the curve when we continue to do them. I have to echo the mayor's concern about a roundabout down by the Dolphin Fountain. That one makes me say, But, we'll see. I mean, as we go through standardizing how we approach these things. The other thing with the Scramble intersection, I remember having this conversation with George Girth, God rest his soul, as to why I thought it was a great idea, and he said, nah, it doesn't work there. And so through the years, we've had multiple different explanations for why, nah, it doesn't work there. But basically, I think that needs to be an education for us, because we keep asking it over and over again, because it seems to make sense. So maybe we have a little primer on, why that device is not appropriate, because it seems to work awfully well in various different places that have them. And I see Mr. Allen wanting to get on that one. I have two other very brief things, but if you want to respond to that right now.
Yeah, I know this has come up in the past. I think a couple of council members has asked the question, you being one of them, Councilmember Falcone, and I have talked to Tully about it. What I will do is I will get back together with Tully, and I will prepare a little position paper why they do or do not work in our city limits. So I know there's a concern about level of service and how it will impact the level of service in intersections. That's my main concern.
I mean, unless we do detours and divert people in cars away from that intersection during the weekends, particularly summer weeks and weekends, the interface between pedestrians and when you cross, when you don't cross, when you turn right, the turning right, quite frankly, from State Street onto Cabrillo is exasperating, to say the very least, just from a user's point of view. So that would be very appreciated, some education for us on that aspect. The other one is the paseos downtown. We're doing an awful lot of new work up and down Chapala, and possibly extending westward, southward, on Cabrillo toward the freeway. And I'm hoping the answer is yes, that all of the tenets and direction and goals that are mentioned here with regard to paseos are going to be adhered to by those various different folks putting forward plans where Dunkin' Donuts is, where where the transit, I don't want to call it village anymore, but where we talk about the corner where the transit station is and the redevelopment of that. Do we have a plan for a paseo in our thinking further down? And I'm just hoping that these tenants extend out, as I think I heard you say, into other areas and other neighborhoods in the city, but particularly in the downtown corridor for the several blocks that may be on either side of State Street. So, Mr. Dayton?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Falcone, yes, that's true. And specifically for the downtown core, and you mentioned actually one location is the block where the transit center is. Doesn't have a Paseo to State Street from parking lot 3. And that's one of the recommendations. There's a line on the map for that specifically. And we've placed some other lines on the map in the areas you're talking about in the waterfront. We've left the policy a little bit open-ended for other areas because one of the issues with putting a line on the map in the redevelopment process or the land development process is the developers sometimes go, well, that line is not where my property is. And so we kind of want to be a little bit general and leave it for the opportunities that do arise. And because it could be, here, there, or over here. It could be the best opportunity, based on the opportunity, the location we want to place a Paseo.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there is going to be the creep of concept, if you will.
That's right.
That goes out.
It's there.
The last one is, one of my little constant digs, and that is is Cliff Drive. And pursuant to the relinquishment of 225, which is imminent, hopefully, at this point, the sidewalk plan in this document is pretty much still an infill plan for that corridor, for the Cliff Drive in particular. Las Positas is a slightly different conversation. But for the Cliff Drive corridor, it mostly involves, if you were to follow this, it would be sidewalk infill. And I think pursuant to 225, the relinquishment, we're looking at a much larger conversation, much larger conceptual redesign, if you will, of Cliff Drive from Castillo to Las Positas. And what that looks like is going to partly come out of a conversation we have with the community. So I wouldn't want to be too, bound rigidly to that this is all we can do. I want to be able to have the freedom to really have that much larger conversation. So tell me that that's okay, and I'll smile and say thank you.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Horton?
Well, not every day is heartwarming up here. Some of them are decidedly not, but this one is. About 7 years ago, I was a founding member of the T&C committee, and I came over from downtown parking, and that was sort of a brave new world of transportation issues in Santa Barbara, and this was certainly one of the topics that original committee back there in '99, I guess it was really concerned about. So to see it come full circle and result in a hard plan like this is very rewarding, and it for people that serve on committees, it gives you a sense that there really was a purpose in being there and having a foundation for the work you do in the city. So that's why I make that point, as it shows us that it's all really worthwhile doing eventually. 2 questions. The one thing that isn't exactly clear to me is interface or integration, one with the private sector and the other with the school district. In the private sector, we have developments, Chapala, Upper State area. School district, of course, has schools all over town. And it seems to me there needs to be some intersection with the planning processes with those 2 sectors. And I don't really get a sense of how that's supposed to work. And maybe that's something Mr. Casey would rather address, or not.
Everybody's looking at him, but Mr. Dayton can answer that.
Just for clarification, Councilmember Horton, are you speaking of in terms of coordination between private and schools in terms of the land development process?
Not so much the private and schools, but 2 separate sets. In other words, let's say there's a commercial development plan that has opportunity for pedestrians intersecting with our operations. How do we get to make sure that our principles relate to them? And the same thing with the schools as they do development on their campuses. I just want to make sure that that's covered somehow.
Okay. Yes, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Horton, in terms of the integration with private and the redevelopment application, the land development process with the adoption of this plan would be a guideline for that land development process. So the staffs that are looking at that project, specifically transportation and community development, would be honing in on issues that relate to the pedestrian realm, public works as well in terms of engineering. And so they would be referencing a plan and perhaps a design that's close to that development. And then in the comments along its way to the Planning Commission would be moving that community or that redevelopment plan to emulate the pedestrian master plan, making sure that the improvements, if we can request them, are requested, and then giving the Planning Commission the citing in the pedestrian master plan where the leverage is, where the policy that asks for that specifically. So that's where we get the integration. In terms of schools, of course, they're a little bit different animal, and they're not required to come through our processes all the time, the land development process. And so what we do, and this is a good opportunity to acknowledge Dr. Drew Van Hengel, who's put an enormous amount of work into this document, and her, as the mobility coordinator, working with the schools directly, with parents, teachers, with COAST, with administrators, to have them get the document through that process. And then it's a relationship building process. It's not a this is what we want process and we're going to get it or we're not going to approve it. It's a relationship, and we're having the conversation of how this is good for our community, good for school health, livability.
We do have joint meetings with the schools. Maybe we should think about having a topic on those meeting agendas to cover areas such as this, maybe even on the next agenda.
Well, we were very delighted with the last meeting we had, and I for one, thought that Ms. Van Hengel's presentation was to the point, and I saw a lot of school board members kind of eyes widening, and we're hoping that there's going to be some momentum generated from that. Specifically, in the chapter on safe routes to school, we're looking for the principals to sign off on the safe routes maps, and we're getting some headway there. But again, it's a volunteer. They come to us, and so we through relationship and through COAST and other organizations that are interested in the health of our schools and our community, working with them to generate the energy and the resources to get them moving in that direction. And so hopefully that'll be successful, and we can look for more opportunities to have the joint school board and council meeting address more topics that are germane to walking.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Williams?
Well, in documents of this size, it could be like 99% beautiful, wonderful things, and you're going to, of course, find the 1% of things that maybe you want to change a little bit. And so I kind of wanted to ask if something was a non-controversial thing that might have just been overlooked. Question on materials. One of the trade-offs of adding pavement, and that's in page 210 to 11. If you add concrete or asphalt, but generally concrete when you're creating a sidewalk, you can reduce your permeability of the surfaces, and obviously that's something that is a trade-off, but is somewhat ameliorated if we're recommending materials that are semi-permeable. And I was wondering if that was something that we could include in there in the final drafts, if we just put a little bit of stuff about permeable concrete or other materials that can be used, or at least cracks between some of the things, so that you have an ability or separations for some of the water to reach the groundwater table. So that was a question. And the other one was, I was looking at the Paseos plan, which is over in 192, I think, or somewhere around there. And some of those existing Paseos, man, I've looked for them, and I didn't even know. So, like, is this one, as you walk through Hatch and Parent? Is that what that's walking through Hatch and Parent? How hard is, do we already have signage, or how hard is it to get signage that says you can walk through it? I don't
Madam Mayor,
I guess some of it is just a question of how much we want to promote it.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Williams, that is one of the, in fact, that was, I think the mayor was on the Planning Commission at the time.
No, that's not my fault.
93? Were you on the Planning Commission in 93? I think that was the year
Yes.
that property came through. It was an enormous debate. I think it was one of
Right.
the recent debates we've had.
Right.
Well, can we get a Paseo here? And And the bottom line was we didn't have the exactions to get a separated uncovered space, which would be more like our traditional paseos. However, it was written into the conditions that that would be a walkthrough for the public during business hours. The signage may not be what it should be, and we can double check on that. That's in the kind of the maintenance chapter and keeping those up and making sure the public is aware of those, which you weren't. But we do have some of those situations that are like that you're walking through a building and it's covered, and that's kind of the magic of paseos. There's so many different shapes and sizes. That's why this plan is almost necessary to kind of describe that and put them on the map. And now you can, firm ground, you can say, well, through that building, this is where that paseo was intended.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Weil.
I'm sorry, but I know I was at that planning commission, and I've got a pretty good memory about this coming up. And in fact, before this this particular instance came up, I was going to mention a fairly substantive legal concern here with respect to paseos and private property. I think that the plan is clear, but people are often not clear in understanding the plan's limitations with respect to legal requirements, and essentially the difficulty the city has in exacting public access through private property. In this particular instance on the office building on State Street, I believe the question came up, and the opinion of the city attorney's office was it's a clear-cut example of an unsupported exaction of basically, in the takings law, this is called a physical invasion. To say you must allow the public to come through here, particularly where there isn't any basis for impact, a negative impact on public access. The public access didn't previously exist on that property. So this whole concept of paseos over private property has to be understood in terms of the law of what exactions can be permitted. We have plenty of paseos over private property, and we have exacted as a city paseos, albeit private paseos. For example, what was called the La Entrada project. You recall, and it's significant that that project proposed retail, first floor, and of course a timeshare or vacation unit approach has sort of a retail aspect to it as well. When a developer is proposing retail in particular, the city's ability to insist that the passageways through that retail connect up with public parking lots or public streets, and that those passageways be kept available to the public generally, not just patrons of the property. We can do that, but we can't, for example, take an office building and say we're going to allow the public to pass through your office building. So I think we better check Mr. Dayton's statement about Hatch and Parent, because that's not the way I remember it at all. They did object to that, the property owner did, not necessarily. I don't believe the tenant was even identified at that point.
I can't remember, so I'm not helpful.
Maybe what we can do is, it's kind of unfortunate because our Paseo network through the mid-blocks between Carrillo and Anacapa is excellent, except for this one block where you don't have anywhere to go. And perhaps we can get some signage that's voluntary during business hours, or, threaten to never hire them for legal work if they don't. But something short of incurring a takings, as in I believe that case was in Ventura County, just off the coast of what kind of physical exactions of paths that you can do and not.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, Councilman Williams, I'm referring specifically to a case called Dolan versus the City of Tigard, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case, I think probably 10 years ago now. And it was to city attorneys, it's an interesting case because it was a very minor little hardware store expansion project that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the City of Tigard exacted a bike path through the property. The hardware store was on a creek, and there was a creek along there was a bike path along the creek, and there was also a need for a setback from the creek. And the U.S. Supreme Court said that was a physical invasion, that was a takings. And again, it's a striking case because it's such a minor project. and such a simple principle. It was a planning commission that exacted it. So we need to be careful about that. I didn't get a chance to say the positive thing about the pedestrian master plan. Gets back to another aspect of takings law, is that exactions which are ad hoc, which are basically pulled out of thin air the day of the hearing, are suspect under the law. But exactions which are programmatic, which are part of a master plan or part of an ordinance that implements a master plan, are much more favored, much more defensible in court. And that's one of the nice things about this pedestrian master plan, particularly the Paseo aspects of it as it relates to retailing, and is our ability to say these are programmatic. This is something that's been in the plan for years, and when you came along with your development, you presumably knew about our pedestrian master plan and our desire for Paseos.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Williams?
No, I just think that I am the last question I had was that environmental review on this was legal, a negative declaration?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that makes sense to me. No? What is it? Okay.
An exemption.
Okay. And, I mean, my feeling is that it makes kind of common sense that if you increase the amount of pedestrians, you're generally decreasing the amount of car use, you're decreasing a lot of impacts, and I frankly have a hard time understanding how anybody can be afraid of more people walking, and that's something that that will yield tremendous benefits to this community, and any way we can promote that, I think, is a public good for both pedestrians and drivers and bikers.
Okay, Mr. Horton. And then
I'd like to move the adoption of the 2006 pedestrian master plan.
Is there a second? Okay, and Ms. Falcone? Do you want to say
I just
something?
have a clarification on what the city attorney said. Am I hearing that the inviting of the public in, or a public benefit like a recreation like the creek or something, is the nexus to which we then attach some sort of an exaction, and the mushy point comes where you either have a residential or the office building? Arguably, you're inviting the public in, but it's a different type. It's not a retail, commercial aspect. Is that where we're kind of, those lines are drawn?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Falcone, I think so. I would distinguish the bike path or the creek or the walkway, the open space walkway, a bit from an urban context. And just as a nice thing about having something like a pedestrian master plan that suggests a bike path along a creek or a walkway along a creek is it then becomes a programmatic thing, and eventually, even though you might acquire these paths in bits and pieces as developers come in, the intent is clear to have this path connect up, to have it go somewhere. And the legal justification is a lot easier to make in that context. And on the other hand, I think I am saying in a commercial office context, in an urban setting, that the public really is not being invited into an office building. Clients come to that office building most of the time with appointments or to do business with someone in an office, and it would be difficult to I think, explain or to justify an exaction that allowed all members of the public to pass through an office building, as opposed to a retail setting where typically the developer, the retailer, is proposing some, in Santa Barbara in particular, open-air passageways through, like the La Arcada situation is probably our classic Paseo. It's private property, but both the property owners, the tenants, and the city really like the way that all works. And so I think it is perfectly reasonable for the city, the planning commission, to exact that sort of quasi-public access, if you will. We're not going to take title to the land. It's still maintained by the private property owner, but perhaps the public is excluded after closing time when security guards are patrolling the area or something like that.
Thank you. I don't want to go too deep into this. I just wanted to see if we could get some general, clarification on those lines, because it gets real blurry in the middle there. So, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any more comment? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unlike the circulation element, it's unanimous. It's very good. Item number 12, please.
Item number 12, designation of voting delegate and alternate for 2006 League Annual Conference to be held September 6th through 9 in San Diego.
Okay, I think a lot of us are going. Does anybody want to be a delegate? That just means you need to go to the business meeting and vote for the city. Not
Madam
vote
Mayor.
for us, but vote in
I'd
our...
like to nominate Councilmember
Yeah.
Falcone.
Second it.
Thank you. I'll gladly accept. I usually stay for the whole thing, and I plan to this time.
Okay. Do we have to vote? Why not? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We're very glad you're doing it. Is there an
That
alternate
just means you guys
too?
could leave early, that's all.
Yeah, I
that
know. Is there an alternate who would like to step in case Ms. Falcone at the last minute can't
means.
go? or
Nominate Ms.
something?
Schneider.
Sure.
Okay. You'll accept that?
But you're staying.
That's what she said. Okay, by acclamation, it'll be Ms. Schneider as an alternate. Okay? If you will read item 13, please. And then I need to adjourn.
Item number 13, conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation.
Okay, and we wanted to adjourn today in John Payne's honor, a very wonderful man and an activist in the city, and we will miss him. On Monday, July 24th at 1:30 for a site visit to the property located at 85 North Lacumba, too. Thank you, and will there be anything to report out? I think
Oh,
not.
Madam Mayor, no reporting out is anticipated.
Okay, thank you, and we'll see you next week.